Staff Sergeant Calvin Rhodes had held his daughter for exactly 7 minutes on the morning of September 14, 2004. He had held her in the hospital room in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, in his uniform, because the deployment orders had already been signed and the transport was leaving at 0600, and he had gotten to the hospital at 11 p.m. when she was born, and had held her in the dark while her mother slept and had watched her face and memorized every detail he could memorize in 7 minutes, because 7 minutes was what he had. He had kissed her forehead. He had told her his name. He had put her back. He had left. He had been gone for 14 months, and he had looked at her photograph every single day. And when he came back, she was 14 months old and looked at him with the eyes of a child who did not know who he was. She was 19 years old on the afternoon she walked onto the Family Feud stage in Atlanta as the captain of a family team, having been told by her mother that they were going to be on a show, having no knowledge that her father had also been told by the show's production team that there was someone who needed to meet her. And she was 3 steps from the podium when Staff Sergeant Calvin Rhodes, 47 years old, in full dress uniform, walked through the door at the back of the studio. His daughter's name was Grace. She had his eyes. He had spent 19 years knowing she would. It was a Thursday in June 2023, and Grace Rhodes was 19 years old. She had come to Atlanta from Charlotte with her mother Vanessa, Calvin's former partner, who had raised Grace alone after the deployment, who had eventually moved on and built a life and had done it well, and who had agreed to this moment after a long conversation with the production team and with Calvin, plus Grace's best friend Amara, her uncle Marcus, and Amara's mother Denise. Grace was pre-med at UNC Charlotte. She wanted to be a pediatrician. She was, by every account, the kind of person who walked into rooms and made them feel more settled. She also had a photograph on her phone, the same photograph her mother had given her when she was 12 and asked to know about her father. The photograph was Calvin in uniform, holding an infant Grace in the hospital room at 11 p.m. She was 7 minutes old in the photograph. Calvin was 28. He was looking at her the way parents look at newborns when they understand, completely and without reservation, what they would do for this person. She had carried that photograph in various forms, printed, digital, screen-saved, for 7 years. She had stared at it when she needed to. She had put it away when she needed to. She had written him a letter at 17 that she had never sent. She had thought about looking for him through military records at 18. She had not done it yet. She did not know that he had been looking for her since she was 4 years old. Calvin Rhodes had completed 3 total deployments. He had received the Bronze Star for his second tour. He had separated from active duty in 2009 and settled in Augusta, Georgia, close but not close enough to show up uninvited in a life that had been built without him. He had made contact with Vanessa in 2012 through a mutual acquaintance, carefully, at a distance. Vanessa had been guarded, which he understood completely. He had not pushed. He had respected every boundary she set. He had sent 1 birthday card per year to a P.O. box address that Vanessa had agreed to, not to Grace's home, because Grace did not know the letters were being sent. And he had written 1 page each year, not asking for anything, just marking the year. He had sent 19 birthday letters. He did not know whether Grace had seen any of them. Vanessa had given Grace the photograph at 12. She had told her daughter the basic facts: who her father was, why he had left when he did, that he had not left because he chose to, that the leaving had been ordered. She had answered every question Grace had asked. She had not answered the ones Grace hadn't asked yet, including whether Calvin had tried to make contact, because the time for that answer was not 12, and she wasn't sure when it would be. She had held the letters in a box. She had told Grace about the box the week before the Family Feud taping. She had shown her one letter, the one from Grace's 17th birthday, the one that was the most complete. Grace had read it twice. She had been very quiet. She had said, "He sounds like he knows me." Vanessa had said, "He's tried to." Grace had been quiet again. Then she had said, "I want to meet him." Vanessa had said, "I know." And that was when Vanessa had called the production team back and said yes. But nobody, not Amara, not Marcus, not Denise, had been told who was going to be on the other side of that studio door. Only Grace and Vanessa knew. And as Grace walked into the studio in her green game show shirt, her face carried the knowledge in the specific way that faces carry things they are trying not to carry. Present, visible, controlled. The taping had not started. The families were still in the process of being arranged on stage when the door at the back of the studio opened. Staff Sergeant Calvin Rhodes, 47 years old, walked through in his dress uniform. Not active duty. He had been separated for 14 years, but he had put it on because he wanted her to see him the way she'd seen him in the photograph. He wanted her to know he was the same man. He had the bronze star at his chest. He had his daughter's eyes in his face. Grace saw him before anyone else did because she was already looking at the door. She had been looking at the door since she walked in. She stood completely still. 300 people. Cameras, lights, all of it present and entirely irrelevant. Calvin Rhodes walked toward his daughter. He covered the distance between the door and the stage in about 20 steps, and then he stopped. He stopped about 10 feet away because he did not know, he genuinely did not know, whether she would come to him or whether she needed him to wait. He had waited 19 years. He could wait another moment. Grace Rhodes walked to her father. She walked to him with the focused, certain step of a 19-year-old woman who has known what this moment was going to feel like since she was 17 and read a letter and thought, "He sounds like he knows me." She walked right to him. She stood in front of him. She looked at his face. She said, "You have my eyes." Calvin Rhodes made a sound that was not a word. He opened his arms. She walked into them. The studio fell completely silent for 4 seconds. Then it didn't. Steve Harvey was standing at the edge of the stage. He had been crying since Grace started walking. He did not move for a long time. He stood at the edge of the stage and watched a 19-year-old woman and her father hold each other for the first time since she was 7 minutes old. And he did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that would improve on what was already happening. When they separated, Steve walked to the center of the stage. "I need a minute," he said. To the room, to the camera, to no one in particular. He pressed his handkerchief to his face. He stayed quiet. The audience, which had been crying and applauding in simultaneous waves, went quiet with him. When he spoke, his voice was low. "I have been on this stage for 12 years. I have surprised people. I have brought families together. I have seen things I could not explain." He stopped. He steadied himself. "But I have never, I will say this simply, I have never witnessed a daughter find her father and say, 'You have my eyes.'" He stopped again. "That is the most beautiful thing I have ever heard on this stage." He looked at Calvin. "Sir, thank you for your service, and thank you for showing up." He looked at Grace. "Young lady, you are going to be an extraordinary doctor, and I want you to know something. You were brought into the world by a man who had 7 minutes and used every single one of them, who looked at you and memorized every detail, who has written you a letter every birthday for 19 years. Grace looked at her father. 19? She said. "He saved all of them," Steve said. They're yours now. He wasn't done. He called his Veteran Family Services coordinator, Live on Stage, and committed to covering all costs of whatever family reconnection support, counseling, or facilitation Calvin and Grace and Vanessa needed over the next 2 years. No timeline, no pressure, just resources available whenever they needed them. He committed to funding Grace's final 2 years of her pre-med program, the scholarship she had earned, and was partly funding herself so she could focus on school and this, both at once, without the financial pressure of trying to do them simultaneously. He looked at Vanessa. "You did this," he said to her. "You raised this young woman, and you gave her the photograph, and you kept the letters, and you said yes at the right time. That took more grace, no pun intended, than most people will ever know." Vanessa pressed her hands together at her face and nodded. He announced both families were receiving the full prize packages. The competing family, the Jackson family from Birmingham, applauded, and their captain, a man named Gregory, stood up and said, "We are honored to have been in this room today. We won nothing, and we got everything." The room laughed and agreed. Amara, Grace's best friend, who had come to Atlanta thinking she was filming a fun day and was now standing in what was clearly the most significant moment of her best friend's life, looked at Grace holding her father's arm and said softly to Denise beside her, "She used to talk about that photograph. She talked about it since we were 14. Denise said, "She looked at it when she needed strength." Amara said, "She doesn't need the photograph anymore." The episode aired 12 weeks after the taping. The clip of Grace saying, "You have my eyes," was viewed 285 million times in 10 days. The hashtag #YouHaveMyEyes trended globally for 8 consecutive days. It was covered by every major television network and dozens of international outlets. It was played at a conference on Veterans Family Reunification Services. A filmmaker produced a short documentary on Calvin's 19 years of birthday letters. 3 months after that Thursday, Calvin and Grace had had 6 in-person visits. They talked on the phone twice a week. She was teaching him things she was learning in her pre-med program. He was teaching her how to change a tire, which she had told him was the most specifically fatherly thing she could think of, and which he had found extremely funny. They were still figuring out what kind of relationship they were building. They were figuring it out together, which was the right way. A year after the taping, the 7 Minutes Foundation was established, named for the 7 minutes Calvin had spent with his daughter before deployment, dedicated to supporting military families facing separation, with a focus on father-child relationship support, deployment counseling, and family reunification resources. Its motto, taken from what Calvin wrote in Grace's first birthday letter, 7 minutes. "I knew everything I needed to know." In its first year, the foundation connected over 1,500 deployed service members with family support resources. Today, Grace Rhodes is in her 2nd year of pre-med at UNC Charlotte. She has 19 letters in a box in her apartment. She has read all of them. She reads one occasionally, not in order, but when she needs to. She told a friend, "He wrote them like he knew who I was going to become." Every year. He just knew she has her father's number in her phone under Calvin. She changed it from Calvin Rhodes to Calvin on the drive home from Atlanta. She's told him she did that. He has not said much about it. He keeps the text thread. Steve Harvey, in a later interview, said, 7 minutes. He had 7 minutes, and he used all of them to memorize her face. He wrote a letter on every birthday for 19 years and kept them because he believed she would read them one day. That's faith. That's the most complete definition of faith I have ever seen. He paused. She said, "You have my eyes." He knew she would. He'd been looking at her photograph every day for 19 years. He knew every feature of her face. He just needed her to know his. Some fathers hold their children for 7 minutes and carry them for 19 years. Some daughters carry a photograph for 7 years and walk toward it for the rest. And some days, in a studio in Atlanta in June, with cameras rolling and 300 people who did not expect to witness the most important moment of their week, 7 minutes and 19 years become the same instant. Grace Rhodes walked to her father. She said, "You have my eyes." She was right. She always had. If this story about Calvin and Grace and 19 years of birthday letters moved you, subscribe to this channel and hit the like button. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that it is never too late to find your way to the people you were supposed to know. Have you ever been reunited with someone you thought you'd lost to time? Share it in the comments. Because as Grace Rhodes proved, the eyes don't lie. And neither does love, no matter how many years it has to wait.